Hello, Team 8B students. This is Mr. Williams, here to prepare you for the Pigman by Paul Zindel. Now, through the course of this slideshow, we're actually only going to read one page of the story because our main goal is pre-reading strategies and anticipating and predicting what's going to happen in this story. A good reader always does these pre-reading strategies. Think of it like anything you've ever done before. Riding a bike, playing a sport, learning a skill, participating in an activity. You need to practice before you get good at something, and learning those basic steps before you start reading in the case of pre-reading strategies could really help you be a more successful reader and get a lot more out of the stories you read. We're going to begin here like we're at a bookstore. Whenever a potential reader goes to a store, he or she has a wide selection to choose from. There are a lot of ways to choose a book, but a good reader always does the following. When I'm picking a book or preparing to start reading a book, I follow these strategies. This is my own little acronym here, but these four things are skills, are activities that all readers do. First of all, when I'm reading, I set a purpose. I want to make sure I know why I'm reading. It could be for fun, it could be to learn something, but I want to know why I'm reading something in the first place. It focuses me and makes sure I know what I want to do. I also have to identify the text type. I want to know that is this a novel or a play, nonfiction, fiction, sci-fi, fantasy. I need to know that so I can be prepared for what's going to happen next. I also want to engage my prior knowledge, my knowledge of a topic. For instance, when I read The Book Thief by Markus Zusak, I already had a pretty extensive knowledge of World War II. And since that story takes place during World War II, I wanted to make sure I understood where I was, the situation in the country that the story takes place in. I want to know that knowledge so that I'm prepared for what's about to happen. Likewise, with a fantasy novel or a sci-fi novel, I have to know what I know about a fantasy genre or sci-fi in regards to what a futuristic setting could be like. I want to engage that stuff. And the last thing is to anticipate / predict. I want to make sure that I am thinking ahead. This book is called The Book Thief, or this book is The Hunger Games. Whatever it is, I want to ask myself, what could this be about? And likewise, using that prior knowledge, whether it's about a topic like World War II or a genre, I can be prepared for what's going to happen next. And you've noticed I made an acronym here. I'm in a Pokemon kick here. We're calling this the Pika chart. So when you think about Pikachu, think Pika, purpose in reading, identify text type, knowledge of topic, and anticipate / predict. So before we begin, here's what you should know about this novel. The Pigman was written by Paul Zindel and published in 1968, so it's an older book, but back then it may have been a current book. We have to keep that in mind. The book won awards such as the New York Times Outstanding Book of the Year. This book is one of the first young adult novels which began gaining recognition in the 1960s. You'll read a lot of these in your high school career, but just think of it this way. Books like The Hunger Games, Divergent, those books you've read that you've enjoyed that were aimed at an audience your age started in the 1960s with these books we're reading here in class. And just because it's interesting to look at, this book is one of the most banned books of the 1990s. It's number 44, number 44 on that list. And while it's quite tame by today's YouTube online standards and all that, it is still something that has a little bit of an element that we do have to be careful about when we're reading it. And just to summarize again, why we read The Pigman is it's an award-winning book that led to the popularity of the young adult novel. This is a great chance to talk about identifying text types because that was the second thing on our pre-reading chart. Young adult novels are longer stories than novel. In this case, it's fiction, and there's going to be chapters we can expect. We can expect to see a narrator. And since it's young adult, we also want to consider the fact this is going to be aimed at a younger audience. So it won't be as childish as a book for children. It won't be as advanced or mature as a book for an adult. But it is going to be a book that is kind of aimed at this group of people. So with young adults, we're going to look at certain themes, certain characters, and that's what we should expect. And speaking of that with young adults, the book has a theme of appearance versus reality, since teenagers definitely know about how they are judged as teenagers and not as necessarily who they are on the inside. That's an important thing to know. This also technically covers our prior knowledge, all the stuff we just covered about. The idea of this was from the 1960s. It's a banned book. The other stuff that we're not going to cover, because I want to try an interesting activity for predicting here about genre and what we know about Paul Zindel, that stuff you may want to also do depending on the research you're doing. But for us, we're focusing on predicting next, and I don't want to give anything away. Now, I'm sure I'm saying this over and over in the slideshow later on, but I have to note that predictions are not just a thing you do at the start of the story. You're always making predictions. After every major event, after every chapter, you should be thinking about what's going to happen next. So let me read this word for word. Making predictions helps a reader prepare for the reading, and a good reader makes predictions throughout the reading to interact with the book in a better way. So we're going to make predictions today on a few notes, like we're at the bookstore. You can do this through the title of the book cover, and the illustrations. And then, like I said, as this book's going, what's happening in the book. And I guess today, actually, we're really only focusing on the title, because the title's kind of vague, and it's interesting what happens when students hear it. So here's your activity. Before we begin reading, you're going to make a prediction for the book. I want you to write a one-page, double-spaced minimum summary of what you think will happen in this book. In other words, a prediction. You're literally writing out the entire plot for this book. Now, if you've read this book before, I want you to make up your own plot line. So if you're someone that already knows what the Pigman's about, tell me what you think the Pigman would be about if you grabbed a different book called The Pigman. Now, this does not have to be accurate. That's the whole point of a prediction. We're trying to make an educated guess. And right now, I've literally given you 2 words, The Pigman. It could be almost anything. But I want you to create a narrative that would make sense as a story. And also, when I say one page, feel free to use multiple paragraphs. I want to make sure we're clear on that. Now, you have 10 minutes to write your prediction. So if we're doing this in class, this is the point where you pause the screen and that your substitute teacher or whoever's in here should be letting you have a chance to write. So I'm going to stop talking and pause the video, and you can get started. Now, obviously, we're not in class right now, but I have some predictions for you because we've been doing this for years, and the predictions are always in a different vein of thought, but we have some common predictions we usually see. Often I see sci-fi or fantasy. That's a picture from Doctor Who, but we'll have scary Pigman, Pigman aliens. The Pigman really feels like it could be a man that's also a pig. So science fiction and fantasy works well for this, because it could be an alien in the future, or it could just be a fantasy world. We also have that realistic fiction idea. Maybe we're talking about a butcher, or we're talking about someone that raises pigs at a pig farm, or maybe it's just someone that owns a bunch of micro pigs because they're adorable, let's face it. It could be a lot of things of that nature, and there'd be a plot around those topics. And it could be horror, it could be comedy. This could be, that guy in the top right looks a little scary, but maybe the Pigman's a silly guy, someone at a fair or a carnival. Honestly, there's really nothing wrong with any prediction here, as long as you took the title The Pigman into account. Now for the Pigman, we have a variety of covers. The 2 on the left side of the screen are the ones that we have in class right now. The other ones, I believe, are older. I can't remember what the years are for these off the top of my head. But all these book covers show a different type of story. Now the one that you might be seeing, depending on how old this video is the more recent one that has a little bit of a modern flair to it. And you can see how different decades, different time periods chose different types of covers, and all these covers could lead to different predictions. Just note that whether you're using the book cover, maybe the author if you've read stuff from the author in the past, just the title of the book, or even just the stuff on the back that tells you a little bit about the book, make sure you're making good predictions, because it'll help you choose a book that you'll want to read, and as you're predicting throughout, it'll help you enjoy the book even. Now it's time for part 2 of this lesson, because once again predictions are important throughout, and this story starts out a little differently than others. It starts out with something called the Oath. It's 3 paragraphs, it's not long, and quite honestly, I bet a lot of you would have skipped it if you hadn't been told about it in the first place. I know if I were in middle school, I would have probably skipped that page until I saw the words chapter 1. We need to make inferences too, and that's a big part of predicting, using clues and inferring what's going to happen. You just did this with the Pigman. You saw pig and man put something together. That's making inferences. We're about to have 3 more paragraphs of information, and I'm going to show you an example of how you make inferences while reading a story. So here's the first page of your novel. You don't need to open the page because we have it right here. I'll read it out loud for you, but feel free to read along in the book. The Oath. Being of sound mind and body on this 15th day of April in our sophomore year at Franklin High School, let it be known that Lorraine Jensen and John Conlon have decided to record the facts and only the facts about our experiences with Mr. Angelo Pignotti. Miss Ryland, the cricket, is watching us at every moment because she is the librarian at Franklin High and thinks we're using her typewriter to copy a book report for our retarded English teacher. The truth and nothing but the truth until this memorial epic is finished, so help us God, John Conlon, and Lorraine Jensen. So making inferences, let's look at the basics we can learn about our story from those 3 paragraphs. First of all, they're writing the oath on April 15th. That sounds simple, but it's important to us for one reason you might not have thought of. If they're writing the oath on April 15th, then the story is already over by this date and they're looking back into the past. And when we don't have a year here, we can use this if we hear something like winter or fall or March to see when the book may be coming to a close. We also know they knew someone named Mr. Angelo Pignotti, and you might think, okay, that's a name, might be connected to the Pigman, but what you might not have thought of is the fact that they address him as Mr. They don't put that in front of their names. So that tells us something that there might be respect here, or it might be an older individual. Think of the people you call Mr., and that might be useful for this inference. Now this is small, but they are sophomores at Franklin High School, so I can start my characterization here because high school students do have certain characteristics, and we can use those characteristics to characterize these characters as we're going along. We know these students are younger. They have to be ages 15 to 18, and we can use that to our advantage. And last but not least, the protagonists are John Collin and Lorraine Jensen. Now, the name John is normal today, but Lorraine jumps out at me. I don't know many Lorraines. I know some Lauries, but not many Lorraines. So I want to show you what this name could tell me about the story. In this case, names can tell us a lot. It could be a time period, a region or culture, since certain areas have certain names that are popular. And even age. I had a friend named Jenny in high school, and she went by Jennifer when she went to college. So just age can change how you want to be called. But to the right is a picture of a grade book from a school in Southern Mass, and this class roster is from 1897. Now you could pause and look at this if you want, but what I've done today, it's 2016. I went through my rank book of 83 students, and I only have one student with any of these names. We don't have any Esthers or Archies or Blanches or Horaces. These names are outdated. While some of these names are still around, things like Raymond and Andrew, they also are only a handful of names on here. A lot of these names I've never seen a student have in the 8 years I've been teaching. Now, something you may not have looked at is the language of the oath, because word choice also can help me make inferences. So when I look at this story, there's two types of languages. We have the formal language in the first and third paragraph, and the informal language in the second. Formal language means professional language, words like being of sound mind and body, let it be known, and so help us God. And when I see those words, it tells me that they're trying to be serious about this matter. Whatever they're talking about, it has to be important to them. The use of informal language, though, is a little bit different. The cricket, which is a nickname, you don't usually see that in formal language, and the word retarded is just inappropriate in this stance. And so when I look at this, I can infer from the informal language that my characters might not be capable of being 100% formal, or maybe they're not trained that way. They are high school students. And the other part, though, is that they could be unkind to others. Words like retarded and the cricket nickname doesn't sound positive to me, and retarded, of course, is an insult, so I don't want to see that either. So this is interesting, and it forms my characterization of these characters. Now, many of you may have made those inferences, but did you catch some of the smaller stuff? I'm calling these the advanced inferences, and you may find a lot of this stuff on my slideshows. First of all, John and Lorraine may be unreliable narrators. That simply means that they're telling us the story, they're narrating it, but we can't fully trust what they're saying because they're unreliable, they're not reliable. One reason I think this is because the library is watching them at every moment. Why would a librarian be watching you at every moment unless she didn't trust you? If you were a good student, she probably wouldn't be watching you the whole time. Likewise, did you notice they lied so they could use the typewriter? In the second paragraph that I've met these characters, they are lying to the librarian, Miss Ryland, so they can use the typewriter to write this story. But that still tells me they're capable of lying, and that's a concern. Now, this seems simple, but the story takes place in the past. Not only is it published in 1968, so if it's set then, that's automatic, but also you may not have noticed that along with Lorraine being outdated, they're using a typewriter instead of a computer. So in using a typewriter, we can use that to set our setting and figure out what time this story takes place. And also, please keep in mind that, like I just said, in 1968, this story could have been present, but for us, it's going to be technically in the past. Now, this is something that I kind of hint at, but Mr. Pigman is probably no longer in their lives, but he definitely is or was very important to them. And the reason why I think that is the phrase memorial epic. I have some definitions for you right here. Memorial means preserving the memory of a person or thing, and an epic is a long poetic composition, usually centered upon a hero, in which a series of great achievements or events are narrated in elevated style. So whoever this person is, that elevated style of writing, trying to preserve this memory, it tells me that the readers are trying to preserve an important and heroic memory of Angelo Pigman, an important person in their lives. We don't know where he is or what's happened to him, but that'll become clear pretty quickly in the story. Now remember, good readers make inferences throughout the reading process. Each time you get new information, you should do the following. First of all, remember your purpose. In this novel, we're reading one of the first young adult novels, and since it's our first novel, we'll probably be practicing a lot of our basic skills with plot line, conflict, theme, all those things you've learned in English in the past. We also want to identify how the info connects to the text type. Novels have chapters, they have parts, they're over 55,000 words or something of that nature, hundreds of pages. And with that information, we know that we have to be in for the long haul. We can use that to our advantage. Always refer back to your prior knowledge, and prior knowledge keeps getting added to as you're reading. So you can refer back to the first chapter or the oath and use that information to make good inferences. And like I said, anticipate or predict how this info will affect the story. We just did that a couple seconds ago with our inferences, and we can start thinking about what's going to happen next after every chapter, every page, every word. And last but certainly not least, enjoy the book. Find ways to connect. Figure out how the characters connect to you, how the situation connects to you. There's always something in the book for everyone to enjoy. Thanks for listening, and I hope you found this video helpful.